Hello. My name is Mika Krell. And yes, my own sister sold our father's war medal for vacation money. My mother's response. A piece of gold is worth more than the past. They thought I'd stay quiet. They thought grief would keep me docile, pliable, just like always. But when I opened that locket, I found a note from Dad no one expected. A secret they tried to bury, proof of their lies, and who he really trusted. They forged documents, spread rumors, tried to take everything. So I gave them a choice: stop, or watch me burn down every false legacy they built. What happens when the one you underestimated decides not to flinch anymore? The sky over Flagstaff had that quiet, brittle blue of early October, clean, dry, unbothered. I parked by the faded white gate of my childhood home, the creak of the hinges oddly familiar as I pushed it open with one hand and balanced the grocery bag with the other. My mother had insisted I come early, days ahead of Dad's memorial, even though I'd already told her I had time off only for the weekend. Her voice on the phone had been curt, clipped like always: "You're not doing anything important. Just come." The kitchen smelled faintly of old coffee and cinnamon, though I doubted she'd baked anything. Probably a leftover candle from the holidays. She was at the sink, slicing apples in that same slow rhythm I remembered from my school days, when I'd tiptoe into the kitchen and sneak a slice, and she'd pretend not to see. Today, she didn't look up. "I thought I'd clean up Dad's medal," I said, setting the bag down and trying not to make it a big deal. "Put it out for the memorial." Her knife didn't pause. "What medal?" I stared at her back. The one he wore at every Veterans Day. The Bronze Star. Now she turned, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel like she'd just handled raw meat. "Oh. That. Your sister sold it last week." I blinked. What? Vera leaned against the counter, expression unreadable. "We needed cash. She said it was just sitting there. Better use than collecting dust." "Mom, that was Dad's." I stopped myself. My voice was rising, and I hadn't been here 10 minutes. "She got a good price. Said it was solid gold. That's something, at least. A piece of gold's worth more than the past, Mika." That was when the room tilted just a little. Not physically, emotionally. Like everything that had been holding steady in my world suddenly didn't know which way was up. Her words landed harder than she likely meant them to, or maybe exactly as hard as she wanted. I turned and walked to the hallway without another word. Dad kept his things in the den, his papers, his uniform, the photos from Iraq. The old oak desk still stood beneath the window, the one he'd refinished himself with sanding blocks and varnish that lingered in the air for weeks. I reached for the top drawer, the one with the velvet-lined box where I'd last seen the medal. Empty. I sat back on my heels, pulled open the side drawers, flipped through manila folders, receipts from 2 decades ago, expired car insurance cards, no medal. My hands moved faster now. I pulled out the whole drawer, dumped its contents onto the carpet. Still nothing. Back in the hallway, I leaned into the kitchen. Did she take anything else? Vera didn't even glance my way. Not that I noticed. Of course not. I went to the garage, where we kept the old army trunk, Dad's. Rusted on the edges, the latches stiff. I pried it open, half expecting to find it there, tucked in the corner. Maybe Callista had just said she sold it. Maybe she was trying to provoke me, get a reaction. But no. Nothing. The garage smelled like motor oil and cedar, like time sealed in cardboard boxes. I sat down on the cooler next to the lawn chairs, staring into the trunk like it might suddenly answer back. Callista hadn't called me once since Dad died. She'd posted on Instagram about him, sure, filtered photos with captions like "Rest easy, soldier," and "Heroes live forever." But not one actual conversation. Not 1 minute spent asking what Dad wanted done with his things. With his memory. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Straight to voicemail. Her latest post popped up on my feed, a charcuterie board in Napa. Detox weekend. Time to let go of the past. The past. Let go of the past, but take the medal. I stared at her photo, the fake lashes, the wine glass, the airbrush glow, and for the first time in years, I felt something shift. For a long time, I'd kept my voice even. Kept my head down. I didn't want to be the angry one. Callista was the successful sister, the shiny one. The one who knew how to charm people into giving her what she wanted, while I learned how to disappear quietly into rooms. But Dad had seen me. Really seen me. I remembered sitting on the porch with him one summer night, the crickets loud, the heat thick in the air. I was 15, crushed by something I didn't even remember now. He handed me the medal, let me hold it. This is what they gave me for getting shot, he'd said, smiling gently. But you don't need a medal to prove you've survived something hard. And now it was gone. Sold. I stood up slowly, closed the trunk, walked back into the house. Vera was sitting at the table now, sipping her tea like it was any other afternoon. I didn't speak. She didn't ask. That night, after she'd gone to bed, I returned to the garage. I opened every box. Photos, letters, cassette tapes, things that smelled like old paper and cedarwood. But the medal was still gone. I sat there for a long time, the cold seeping into my legs through the concrete floor. I ran my fingers over the fraying edges of an old flag folded neatly inside a wooden triangle. My breath formed soft clouds in the air. If memory has no worth here, I whispered, then maybe it's time someone proves what it's really made of. The silence in the garage lingered long after my whisper faded into the dim light. The air had that thick, unmoving stillness that made time feel stuck. I sat there for a few more minutes, knees drawn up to my chest, listening to the ticking of the water heater and the occasional creak of the settling house. I could hear Vera moving around upstairs, closing cabinets, her slippers shuffling against the tile. She didn't ask if I was okay. I didn't expect her to. By the time I made it back inside, the light had shifted into that dull gray-blue of a late afternoon in October. I dropped my jacket onto the old coat rack and headed straight to my room without speaking. The box was gone. There was no changing that. But the way she'd said it, so final, so flippant, kept replaying in my head. A piece of gold is worth more than the past. I sat on the edge of the bed, pulled my phone from the nightstand, and searched Flagstaff pawn shops. 3 popped up. One of them, Northview Exchange, was near the old neighborhood where Callista used to live when she first moved out. It wasn't even a question anymore. I grabbed my keys. I didn't tell Vera where I was going. Northview was a small, squat building wedged between a vape shop and a laundromat. Its windows were darkened by years of dust and neglect, and the blinking red "Open" sign looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. A metal bell jingled as I stepped inside. The place smelled like old wood and stale air. A man behind the counter, late 60s, heavy-set, with thinning gray hair and a ball cap that read "Desert Storm Veteran," looked up with a slow blink. His vest had a few faded pins I recognized from Dad's collection. I stepped forward. "Hi. I'm looking for something that might have been brought in recently. A Bronze Star medal. It belonged to my father." He studied me for a second, then nodded once. "Yeah. I remember that piece." My heart skipped. "It was sold here." "Sure was. Lady came in last week. Blonde, tall, sunglasses on inside. Real confident. Didn't even ask what I'd give for it, just said she needed the money." That sounded like Kalishta. Do you still have it? I asked, hoping. The man shook his head. Sold same day. Some guy, middle-aged, soft-spoken, looked like he knew what it was. Paid in cash. Didn't leave his name. Of course. He paused, then reached under the counter. But there was something inside it. Never seen anything like it before. Tiny piece of paper, folded up like one of those old love notes. He handed it to me carefully, like it might fall apart in my hands. It was creased, yellowed, and barely held together by the folds. I opened it slowly. If this ends up in the wrong hands, I've failed. Forgive me. It was Dad's handwriting. I'd recognize that slanted D anywhere. The capital letters were shaky, like he'd written it in a rush. Or with weak hands. I couldn't move for a moment. My fingers trembled, and I stared at the note like it was some kind of message from the grave. I thanked the man quietly and stepped out into the fading light. The air had cooled significantly, and my breath was visible when I exhaled. I sat in my car, turned the engine off, and rested my forehead against the steering wheel. My hands were still clutching the note like it might evaporate. The phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Unknown number. I almost didn't pick up. Hello. A pause. Hi, sorry to call like this, a man's voice said. You don't know me, but I bought something last week, a medal. From a pawn shop. I wasn't gonna say anything, but it didn't feel right keeping it. I sat up straighter. You bought the Bronze Star. Yeah. Yeah, that's the one. Look, I can't explain why, but when I opened it and found that note, I felt like it wasn't meant for me. You should see what's inside. There's more. Another pause. Yeah. I'll bring it to you. Tomorrow. I just didn't want to hold on to something that clearly meant more to someone else. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you for calling. After I hung up, I sat there until the dashboard lights dimmed from inactivity. I couldn't drive. I couldn't even think clearly. What else had Dad hidden? What did he need to protect? And why hadn't anyone told me this was even possible? The clouds had turned deep purple overhead, the sun just a faint rim behind the mountains. I let the windows fog as I clutched the note, reading those same 8 words over and over again. If this ends up in the wrong hands. I thought back to the way Vera had looked at me, calm and empty, like none of this mattered. And the way Kalishta had moved on so quickly, so effortlessly, always one step ahead of the fallout she left behind. I didn't know what was inside that medal. Not yet. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They weren't the right hands. The morning air carried a kind of quiet that felt deliberate, as if the whole world was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. The note had stayed on the passenger seat all night, catching every glint of light from the street lamps outside my window. By dawn, I'd memorized each letter of my father's handwriting, traced the words in my mind until they were burned into it. If this ends up in the wrong hands, I've failed. Forgive me. The knock came just as the sun broke over the mountains, soft, tentative, like the person on the other side didn't want to commit to the sound. I hesitated before opening the door. A man stood there, maybe in his 50s, with a flannel shirt and a gentle, apologetic look. He held a small brown box, taped unevenly, like it had been wrapped in a hurry. You're Mika, right? I nodded. He shifted the box from one hand to the other. I'm the one who bought your father's medal. The one from the pawn shop. I don't feel right keeping it. He didn't wait for me to answer, just extended it toward me. His voice was steady but his eyes flicked away, as if he'd seen something inside it that unsettled him. It's all there, he said. I didn't take anything out. But I think he meant for you to see it. I thanked him quietly and watched as he walked back down the driveway, his truck disappearing behind the tall pine trees. I didn't open the box right away. I carried it to the kitchen table, set it down, and just stared at it for a long time. The tape peeled easily. Inside was the metal, nestled in a layer of old tissue paper. I lifted it carefully, like it might shatter. The weight of it in my palm was the same as I remembered, solid, cold, and heavier than it should have been. When I looked closer, I saw that the locket wasn't sealed shut like I always thought. My thumb found a tiny hinge near the clasp, almost invisible, and when I pressed, it clicked open. Inside was a small roll of paper, wound so tight it looked like a fragment of cigarette filter. I unrolled it slowly, afraid it might crumble. The ink had faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, Dad's looping, careful letters. Mika, if you're the one reading this, it means the metal came back to the right hands. What they want is the house, the land, the money. What you deserve is the truth. Go to Box 47, Northern Union Bank. Ask for Patricia. And remember, you saw more than anyone else. That's your power. My throat tightened. For a second, the room felt smaller. I ran my thumb over the word power, smudging the edge of the ink. Dad had always been quiet about things like money, property, even his illness. He used to say, people change when you tell them what you're worth. I'd never known what he meant until now. I folded the note carefully, slid it into my wallet, and pressed my hand over the spot like I was afraid it might vanish. For the first time in months, I had direction. The drive to his old office felt heavier than the air itself. The smell of varnish still clung to the walls, the shelves lined with books about leadership and ethics, and the photo of him shaking hands with his commanding officer still sat crooked on the desk. I sat in his old chair and closed my eyes. That room had always been his space, off limits, sacred. Now it was mine. I remembered the day he gave me the medal. It was my 30th birthday, the same year Callista moved to Los Angeles. He'd been sick then, thin, pale, but still managing that calm authority that made everyone listen when he spoke. He'd called me out to the porch, the sky that evening streaked in orange and violet. The cicadas were screaming in the trees. This isn't about war, he'd said, placing the medal in my hand. It's about peace. Your peace. I'd laughed nervously, trying to make light of it. Dad, I don't need a medal to remind me who you are. It's not for me, he'd replied. It's for when you forget who you are. Now, sitting there, that memory hit like a wave. Maybe he'd known what was coming, how Vera would shrink into her pride, how Callista would turn into someone polished and hollow, how I'd lose myself trying to keep us all together. I picked up his old pen, the one with the brass tip and the crack in the middle, and rolled it between my fingers. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but sharper. I whispered, if they saw a weak little girl, they were wrong. By afternoon, I'd packed the note and the medal into my bag. I couldn't stay in that house any longer. Every wall held their voices, and I didn't want to hear them. The drive into town was quiet except for the faint hum of the engine and the whisper of tires on asphalt. Northern Union Bank sat near the main intersection, its brick facade faded but familiar. I parked near the side entrance and sat there for a minute, staring at the reflection of my face in the windshield. I thought about Mom's words again. A piece of gold is worth more than the past. Maybe she was right about gold, but not about worth. Worth wasn't in the metal. It was in what you fought to keep when everyone else told you to let it go. I stepped out of the car. The medal's weight in my bag felt like a heartbeat. The lobby was cool, the kind of sterile quiet that made you lower your voice without thinking. A woman behind the counter smiled mechanically. Her name tag read Patricia. I tightened my grip on the bag and walked forward. Hi, I said, voice steady. I need access to lockbox 47. My name is Mika Krell. Patricia blinked once, then nodded and typed something on her screen. Of course, Miss Krell. May I see your ID? As I reached into my wallet, my fingers brushed against the folded note again. For a moment, I imagined Dad standing there beside me, that half smile of his, the one that always said, "I told you you'd find your way." Whatever was waiting in that box, I knew it wasn't just paperwork. It was something bigger, something meant to outlast all the noise and greed and silence that had filled our home. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid to see it. Patricia's nails clicked against the keyboard as she typed my name, the rhythmic sound echoing in the sterile air of the bank lobby. I handed her my ID with both hands, trying to look composed even though my pulse was pounding hard enough to make my vision blur slightly. She looked at the screen, nodded once, and said, "Please wait just a moment, Miss Krell. I'll have someone bring the box up." I nodded, clutching my bag close to my chest. The cool air conditioning brushed across my neck, and for some reason, I felt like I was about to open a door that had been locked for decades. Patricia disappeared through a heavy metal door, leaving me alone at the counter. When she returned, she gestured for me to follow. "This way, please." The hallway was long, narrow, with white walls that absorbed every sound. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, the shuffle of her shoes on the tile. She led me into a small privacy room with a single table, 2 chairs, and a stack of legal pads. A large metal box sat in the center of the table, about the size of a shoebox but heavier, its lid gleaming under the light. Patricia placed a set of keys on the table. "Take all the time you need. When you're finished, press the buzzer near the door." She gave me a polite smile, the kind bankers give when they know they're standing beside something personal and fragile, and then left me alone. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at the box, afraid that whatever was inside would make everything worse, or confirm what I already suspected. Finally, I took a breath and turned the key. The lid gave a soft metallic click. Inside lay an envelope labeled in black marker, property title, Krell Estate. Beneath it was a thin folder with my father's handwriting again, block letters, neat even in death. Will and Testament of Desmond Krell. My stomach twisted. I pulled it out carefully, as though even breathing too hard might scatter the truth into dust. Beneath the folder sat a flash drive and another envelope, smaller and sealed with tape. On the front, in pen slightly shakier than the rest, he had written, "In case I'm not around." I unfolded the will first. The paper was worn but intact. I skimmed the lines until my eyes caught the words that froze me where I sat. I, Desmond Krell, leave the residence and all its contents to my daughter, Mika Krell, who is to be the sole custodian of the Krell estate. Vera Linnell and Callista Marie Krell shall receive monthly stipends at Mika's discretion, provided the estate maintains sufficient funds. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My fingers dug into the paper as I reread the paragraph again and again. Dad had trusted me to protect everything. The house, the land, the memories he built into every plank of that porch, and they'd taken it. They'd sold pieces of him without shame, without even blinking. I picked up the smaller envelope, tore it open, and pulled out the folded sheet inside. If you're reading this and not them, it means I was right about what they'd do. I couldn't change them, Mika, but I hoped you'd be strong enough not to become like them. Don't let guilt trick you into surrendering what's yours. The truth is worth more than their comfort. The handwriting faded toward the bottom, and I imagined him sitting in his chair by the window, writing through the tremor in his hand. My eyes burned, but I didn't cry. I couldn't, not yet. When I looked up again, the walls of that little room seemed to tilt inward. I placed the letters back carefully, slid the will into my bag, and pressed the buzzer. Patricia came in a moment later, her expression unreadable. "All finished?" "Yes." My voice came out steady, though I could feel the weight of something enormous pressing behind my ribs. She nodded and took the box, locking it again with a firm click. "Have a good afternoon, Miss Krell." I walked out into the sunlight, blinking hard. The air outside was warmer now, and the noise of traffic on the main road broke the strange silence I'd been carrying since morning. My car door groaned as I opened it, and I dropped into the seat, gripping the steering wheel. Home. I had to go home. The drive back was slow. I hit every red light between the bank and our street, and by the time I turned into the driveway, the shadows had stretched long across the yard. The house looked smaller somehow, like it was shrinking from its own secrets. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something burnt, probably another one of Mom's half-finished attempts at cooking. I went straight to Dad's office. The afternoon light was sliding through the blinds in thin golden stripes across the floor. The file cabinet in the corner was locked, but I remembered where he'd hidden the spare key, in the small ceramic dish shaped like a seashell. It was still there, coated in dust. The drawer opened with a reluctant groan. There it was, another copy of the will, crisp and newer than the one in my bag. The paper was smooth, the ink darker, the signature cleaner, but not quite right. My father's signature always dipped slightly on the K, like the pen hesitated before the loop. On this one, it was perfect, too perfect. The date in the corner read 2 weeks before his death, though I knew for certain that at that time he could barely hold a pen. The room seemed to pulse with heat. I felt it rise behind my eyes, not the weak sting of sadness but the sharp burn of betrayal. They hadn't just sold his metal, they'd rewritten his last words. I carried both wills into the living room. The light outside had dimmed, the sun sliding low over the horizon. Vera was on the couch, feet up, flipping through a magazine. She looked up when I entered but didn't bother to hide her annoyance. "Back already?" she asked. "You were gone a while." I stood there for a long second, watching her, the forged document in one hand, the real one in the other. "Did you know about this?" I asked quietly. She frowned. "Know about what?" I held up the real will. "Dad's estate. The version you kept isn't the one he signed." Her eyes flicked to the paper, then away. "You're overreacting again, Mika. There were revisions. He wanted things to be fair." "Fair?" I laughed once, sharp. "He left everything to me because he knew what you'd do. He even wrote it down. If you're reading this and not them, it means I was right." Vera's lips tightened. "You always twist things to make yourself the victim." "I did what was necessary." I stepped closer. "You forged his name." Her face hardened. "Watch your tone. You don't know what you're talking about." Behind her, the clock ticked steadily, each second stretching longer than it should. For a moment, we just stared at each other, years of unspoken things hanging thick in the air. Then she turned away, pretending to read again. "Found what you were looking for," she said, her voice flat, dismissive. I looked down at the papers in my hand, at the proof of everything she'd denied, and said softly, "More than you ever thought I would." Her hand froze mid-page, but she didn't answer. The house felt cold that evening. I sat at the dining table long after she'd gone to her room, the will spread open in front of me. The lamp cast a small circle of light, the rest of the room swallowed in shadow. My laptop hummed quietly as I turned it on and opened a new folder on the desktop. Evidence, for attorney. I scanned every page carefully, labeling each file, checking signatures, noting dates. With each click of the mouse, the anger inside me cooled into focus. I wasn't just grieving anymore, I was building a case. When the last document uploaded, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The night outside was completely still. Somewhere down the hall, Vera's television murmured faintly through the wall. Dad had trusted me to protect what was his. I intended to do exactly that. I spent the afternoon cross-referencing files and organizing every scanned page in that new folder, my mind laser-focused, my body running on stubborn determination rather than rest. The hum of the computer fan filled the silence until my eyes burned from staring at the screen. When the last file finally uploaded, I let out a long breath and pushed away from the desk. The house was too quiet. Through the half-open window, I could hear the faint hum of cars on the distant highway. For a while, I just sat there, listening, trying to remember what peace used to sound like. By the time the sun dipped below the tree line, the kitchen lights glowed against the fading sky. I walked down the hallway to grab a glass of water, only to stop short in the doorway. Vera was at the stove. And next to her, setting the table like nothing had ever gone wrong, was Callista. My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. Neither of them noticed me at first. Callista's laugh, bright and shallow, filled the space that had been silent all week. She was wearing one of those soft sweaters she loved, cream-colored, expensive, the kind that screamed success without having to say it. "Oh, Mika," Mom said suddenly, glancing over her shoulder as if I were an afterthought. "Look who decided to stop by for dinner." I swallowed hard. "I see that." Callista smiled like she was greeting a stranger. "Hey, sis. Thought I'd come by and make sure Mom's eating real food instead of cereal for dinner." Mom laughed, too loud, too forced. "She brought wine. Isn't that nice?" I stared at the table. It was set with 3 plates, silverware polished, napkins folded into neat triangles. My place was already waiting. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked quietly. Vera didn't look at me. It was last minute. That was a lie. The roast chicken smelled like it had been cooking for hours. I sat down anyway. The chair scraped against the tile, the sound cutting through the false cheer in the room. Callista poured wine into my glass before I could say no. "So," she began, her tone bright and practiced. "How have things been? You still working at the library?" "Yes." "That's nice." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. She speared a piece of chicken and added, "Mom said you've been going through Dad's things again. That can't be healthy, Mika. It's been years. You need to move forward." The words hit me like small, deliberate cuts. "Move forward," I said, keeping my voice even. "You mean forget?" Callista set down her fork, lips curving into a patronizing half-smile. "No one's saying forget. We're saying live. There's a difference." I stared at her for a long time, then asked, "Did you forge Dad's will?" Her fork froze mid-air. Mom dropped her napkin. "Mika," she warned, her tone sharp. "Not tonight." Callista recovered quickly, leaning back in her chair. "What are you talking about?" "I found the real one," I said. "And the fake one. The one that names you and Mom as beneficiaries." Her expression didn't flicker. "You always jump to conclusions." Maybe he changed it and forgot to mention it. He wasn't exactly stable toward the end. He couldn't even hold a pen 2 weeks before he died. Her mouth tightened. "Don't start drama. You always overreact." "Overreact?" I laughed softly, incredulously. He left me everything because he trusted me not to sell his life off piece by piece. "And what did you do?" "You sold the one thing that mattered most." Callista's eyes flashed, but before she could respond, Mom spoke up, her voice low and firm. "We're trying to have peace. Don't ruin it, Mika." "Peace?" I repeated. "That's what you call pretending nothing happened?" Vera set her glass down with a quiet thud. "You always dig up the past. It's toxic. You don't know how to let things go. Toxic, I murmured. The word felt almost funny in my mouth. Callista leaned forward, her voice turning sharper. You weren't even there the night he died. You were too emotional, too fragile to face it. Don't act like you were some saintly daughter guarding his memory. For a moment, the world went very still. The only sound was the clock ticking behind me. My hands were under the table, fists clenched so tight my knuckles ached. I looked from one to the other, Mom, detached and cold, Callista, proud and poisonous, and realized they had rewritten everything. My father's death. His will. His memory. I stood up slowly. The chair legs screeched across the tile. You want peace, I said, or you want silence? Mom frowned. Don't talk to me like that. No, I said, my voice steady. You've talked at me my entire life. You've called it love, or family, or doing what's best, but all it ever was control. Callista scoffed. You sound ridiculous. I met her eyes. Do I? Because for the first time, I see exactly what you've both been doing. You didn't want peace, you wanted obedience. Callista pushed back her chair. I'm not listening to this. Then don't, I said. But listen to this. I reached into my bag, pulled out the flash drive, and set it on the table. The metal clinked softly against the wood. This is what Dad left behind, I said. And if you keep pushing, I'll show everything. Callista's smirk faltered, just for a second. You're bluffing. I smiled faintly. Try me. Mom exhaled, frustrated. Mika, stop acting like a victim. You're making a scene. I turned toward her. No, Mom. I'm making history. For once in this family, the truth is going to count for something. The silence that followed was thick, heavy. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. Callista's gaze darted to Mom, searching for backup, but Vera said nothing. I picked up my wineglass, took a slow sip, and set it down again. Enjoy dinner, I said softly. It's the last time you'll pretend to have control. Then I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my footsteps steady even though my chest felt tight. Behind me, I could hear Callista whisper something angry, the sharp edge of her voice breaking through the air. But I didn't stop. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against it. The house was quiet again, except for the muffled voices in the dining room, low and hissing. I stared at the flash drive still warm from my hand. It was small, simple, unassuming, but it held more power than either of them realized. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. For a moment, I just looked at the empty folder titled Evidence for Attorney. Then, without hesitation, I slid the flash drive into the port. The screen blinked to life. Folders. Documents. Videos. Dad had left me more than proof, he'd left me his trust. And that, finally, was enough. The air in my room still smelled faintly of roasted chicken and wine from dinner. I hadn't eaten. I couldn't. The flash drive sat on my desk, plugged into the laptop, its tiny red light blinking like a heartbeat. After everything that had happened, one thing had finally settled into my bones: there was no turning back. The next morning, I woke early, even before sunrise. The house was silent. No television murmuring behind closed doors, no coffee brewing. I slipped out quietly, shoes in hand, so the front door didn't creak too loud. The cold morning air hit my face, bracing and clear. For the first time in weeks, it felt like I could breathe. I drove downtown, passing the familiar storefronts of Flagstaff, waking up for the day. The old diner where Dad used to take me for pancakes was already open, lights bright against the dawn. For a second, I almost stopped there, habit, comfort, but then I saw the lawyer's office just beyond it. A plain brick building with an American flag fluttering half-mast in front. The brass plaque on the door read Monique Harlan, attorney at law. Her receptionist looked up as I walked in. "Do you have an appointment?" "I don't," I said, trying to steady my voice. "But I think she'll want to see me." The woman gave me a curious look but buzzed Monique anyway. 2 minutes later, a door opened down the hall, and Monique Harlan stepped out, a tall woman in her 50s with silver streaks in her dark hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Ms. Krell," she said, extending a hand. "Come in." Her office was tidy but lived in, full of law books and a faint smell of coffee. I sat across from her, setting the folder of documents on the polished desk. She folded her hands. "Tell me what brings you here." So I did. I told her about the medal, the pawn shop, the note, the bank, and finally, the forged will. She didn't interrupt, just listened, occasionally jotting down notes. When I slid the flash drive across the desk, she plugged it into her computer without hesitation. The faint hum of the hard drive filled the silence. After several minutes of scrolling through the files, she leaned back and let out a quiet exhale. "Well, Mika, I've seen a lot of messy estate disputes, but this," she tapped a line on the will with her pen. "This is not only unethical. It's illegal." I met her eyes. "So what happens now?" "You have enough for a legal dispute," she said. "More than enough. The original will, the forgery, the letter in your father's handwriting, these are all substantial. I'll file for a preliminary injunction today to freeze any assets until this is sorted out." "Freeze them," I repeated softly, almost tasting the word. It felt heavy, final. Monique nodded. "It means they can't sell, transfer, or claim anything until the court reviews it. But you should prepare yourself. Family cases like this get ugly fast. Are you ready for that?" I looked at my hands resting on the edge of her desk. They made it ugly the moment they lied. Her lips curved into something that might have been respect. "All right then." By the time I left her office, the sun was high enough to warm the hood of my car. I sat there for a minute, watching people cross the street, living their ordinary, uncomplicated lives. Then I pulled out my phone and called my job at the library to ask for a few more days off. I didn't explain why. I just said I needed time. The next few hours moved in a blur, signing paperwork, scanning IDs, answering emails. Monique's assistant handed me a copy of the petition before I left. My name looked strange printed in bold above the words plaintiff, Mika Krell. By late afternoon, I was back home. The mail truck was just pulling away from the curb, and a thick envelope sat propped against the front door. The words certified mail were stamped across the top. One for Vera, one for Callista. I carried them inside and set them on the kitchen counter, right beside the half-empty wine bottle from the night before. Mom found them first. She came storming down the hall 20 minutes later, envelope crumpled in her hand, her eyes sharp with disbelief. "You really filed a lawsuit?" she demanded. "Against your own family?" I didn't even look up from the table. "No," I said calmly. "I filed it against fraud." Her mouth opened and closed like she didn't know which part to be angrier about. "You're embarrassing yourself, and me. What will people think when they hear you dragged your mother into court?" I met her gaze. "Maybe they'll think the truth finally mattered to someone." She blinked, thrown off by my calm tone. "You've always been ungrateful. You twist everything to make yourself a martyr." "I learned from the best," I said quietly. She glared at me for a long moment, then threw the envelope down and left the room, muttering something under her breath about how I was destroying the family. The door to her bedroom slammed. The house trembled for a moment and then went still again. I sat there, breathing slowly, feeling a strange kind of steadiness settle over me. My heart wasn't racing anymore. The fear was still there, yes, but now it had a purpose. Later that evening, I took out my journal, a habit I'd dropped after Dad's funeral, and opened to a clean page. My handwriting looked more deliberate than usual. They don't have to like me. But they'll have to respect the truth. The words came easily. For the first time, they felt like mine. I closed the notebook and looked around my room. The fading light through the curtains painted the walls in shades of amber and gray. It reminded me of the way Dad's study used to look when he worked late, soft light, hard choices. When I finally went to bed, sleep came fast and heavy. Hours later, I woke to the vibration of my phone on the nightstand. The red glow of the clock read 2:17 a.m. My stomach tightened as I reached for it. The screen lit up with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the accept button, then pressed it. For a second, all I heard was silence. Then a voice, low and deliberate, "You should stop this while you still can." The call ended before I could respond. I sat there in the dark, phone still in my hand, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the next room. For the first time since Dad's death, I wasn't scared of the quiet. The room was dark except for the faint glow from my phone screen. My fingers hovered over the call log, the anonymous number still highlighted in blue. The voice echoed in my head, low, calculated. "You should stop this while you still can." I stared at the ceiling for a long while after that. It was the kind of silence that doesn't comfort you, only reminds you that something has shifted. At some point, I must have fallen asleep again because the next thing I knew, morning light had crept through the blinds, casting long stripes across the floorboards. By noon, the real fallout began. A knock came at the front door, not the hesitant kind, but the kind meant to be heard. I opened it to find a courier holding a large envelope marked "Court Filing, Guardianship Petition." My chest tightened before I even took it from him. The return address was from a local attorney's office. Vera's. I tore it open in the hallway. The language was dense, formal, but unmistakably brutal. Vera was petitioning for temporary guardianship over me, claiming I was emotionally unstable, exhibiting erratic behavior, and unable to make rational legal decisions regarding the family estate. I stood there in shock. Then I laughed, an empty, disbelieving sound. It was always the same strategy. When control started slipping, they called you crazy. I took the documents to Monique the same afternoon. She scanned through them without flinching. "This is desperate," she said. "And it's not going to hold up. But we'll need to respond immediately." "I want to take a psych evaluation," I said. "Voluntarily. I want proof." Monique looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. "Good. That's the right move. I'll set it up with someone impartial. It's unfortunate, but if they're going this route, we're going to fight it head-on." The appointment was set for the next day. Meanwhile, Vera was already spreading her narrative. By the time I returned home, I noticed the change in the way neighbors looked at me. Mrs. Perry from 2 houses down waved a little too quickly, avoiding eye contact. The mailman, who usually said hi, barely nodded. I didn't even have to guess why. That evening, I stepped out onto the porch to clear my head, only to find Vera sitting in the same chair Dad used to claim every Sunday. She sipped tea with both hands wrapped around the mug like she hadn't just tried to legally strip me of my rights. "You're making this harder than it has to be," she said without looking up. I crossed my arms. "You think trying to declare your adult daughter mentally incompetent is making things easier?" She finally looked at me. "You've always been fragile, Mika. Even when you were little. Always so emotional, so easily overwhelmed." "That's funny," I said. "Because the court's going to see something different when they get the results." She didn't reply. just took another sip of tea and went back to scrolling on her phone. The next day, I completed the evaluation. The psychologist was calm, respectful, and thorough. By the time we finished, I felt oddly relieved, like someone had finally seen me without the fog of family dysfunction clouding the lens. 2 days later, the results came back, no signs of psychological impairment. Fully competent. I forwarded it to Monique immediately. Her reply was swift, "This helps a lot." But while we handled things the right way, Callista played a different game. That weekend, I got a text from an old high school classmate I hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey, just saw your sister's post. Hope everything's okay." My stomach dropped. I opened social media and there it was. A photo of Callista on a beach at sunset, wind in her hair, eyes distant like she was carrying the weight of the world. The caption read, "It's hard watching someone you love spiral. I'm choosing compassion over confrontation. Please keep my family in your prayers. Family first, mental health matters." There were over 200 likes. The comments were full of sympathy and support. "You're so strong. Praying for her healing. Mental illness runs in every family. You're doing the right thing." I stared at the screen, mouth dry. Then came the email. Sent from an anonymous address. The subject line, "Concerned friend." I hesitated, then clicked. The message was short, but it hit like a hammer. "Did you know Mika tried to overdose after her father died? I hear she's not well. Be careful. She's unstable." I stared at it for a long time, my face burning with shame and fury. It was completely false. I'd grieved. Quietly. Alone. But I had never once tried to hurt myself. They weren't just trying to discredit me in court, they were trying to destroy my name, my dignity, and any shred of credibility I had left. That night, I screamed into a pillow until my throat hurt. The kind of scream you let out when your back's against the wall and nobody else is listening. Then came silence. And in that silence, something inside me solidified. I picked up my phone, sat at the edge of my bed, and opened the camera app. The screen reflected my face, tired, raw, but not broken. I hit record. "My name is Mika Krell," I said. My voice wasn't steady, but it was real. "And I'm tired of being quiet while people lie about me. I never tried to hurt myself. What I did do was find a will my father left behind. A will that named me as his only heir. I've been accused, slandered, and manipulated by people who claim to love me." I paused, took a breath. "I know the truth. And I will not be intimidated into silence. You've pushed me to this edge. And now I'm pushing back." I saved the video, uploaded it privately, and sent it to Monique. Then I put my phone down, walked to the window, and looked out at the quiet neighborhood. I had no idea who was watching me now. But one thing was certain, if they were expecting me to back down, they were going to be disappointed. The morning after I recorded that video, the air felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. I didn't post it yet, but the act of recording it changed something inside me. I wasn't reacting anymore, I was responding. I made myself coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and watched the sunlight crawl across the counter. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel powerless. By mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen that I hadn't seen in years, Garrett Ames. My father's old friend. He'd spoken at Dad's memorial, his voice shaking when he described Desmond Krell as a man who kept his word even when it hurt. "Hey, kid," Garrett said when I answered, his voice gravelly but warm. "You home?" "I am." "Why?" "I've got something of your dad's. It's time you had it." When he arrived, the sun was high and sharp, cutting through the trees in stripes. He parked his old pickup by the curb, the same one he'd driven since I was a teenager. When he climbed out, he was holding a sealed manila envelope and a small flash drive. He handed them to me without preamble. He gave this to me a few weeks before he passed. Told me to keep it until you needed it. Why now? I asked quietly. Because I saw what your family's been saying online, Garrett said, jaw tightening. Your dad didn't raise you to take punches without swinging back. Whatever's in here, it's meant to hit hard. He patted my shoulder once and left before I could say thank you. Inside the envelope was a folded letter in Dad's handwriting, for Mika, in case the truth gets buried deeper than it should. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. A video file blinked to life. Dad appeared on the screen, sitting in his study, the Arizona sun pouring through the blinds. His face was thinner than I remembered, his skin pale from chemo, but his eyes were clear, sharp. Mika, he began, voice slow but steady. If you're seeing this, you need to remember something. The truth only matters if someone is brave enough to say it out loud. I froze, hand hovering over the keyboard. He continued, I left the house, the land, and everything inside it to you. You're the only one who ever cared what it meant. Vera and Callista, they'll twist this if they can. Don't hate them. Just don't let them win. He took a shallow breath. Callista, if you ever see this, I hope you realize that winning doesn't mean much if you have to lie to get there. You always wanted to win, but you never asked what we were playing for. The screen flickered once and went black. I sat there, trembling, tears burning my eyes. He'd known everything that was coming. Every betrayal, every manipulation. And somehow, he'd found a way to protect me even after he was gone. By the next morning, Monique had a copy of the video. She called me within an hour. This changes everything. We're presenting this at the mediation hearing tomorrow. Be ready for fireworks. The courthouse was packed. People whispered as we walked in, neighbors, co-workers, a few faces I recognized from around town. Callista and Vera were already seated at the defense table, their lawyer whispering to them. Callista wore her best power suit and that same smug confidence she'd perfected for the camera. When the judge entered, the room went still. Monique stood. Your Honor, new evidence has surfaced, a recorded statement from the late Desmond Krell, directly addressing the intent of his estate and the conduct of the respondents. The judge gestured. Proceed. Monique nodded to me. I plugged the flash drive into the projector and pressed play. Dad's face filled the screen. His voice filled the room. Every word landed like a hammer. You could feel the air tighten, the collective shift as people realized what they were hearing wasn't rumor or emotion, it was truth, recorded and undeniable. When he said my name, I heard someone in the back gasp. Vera's expression faltered first. Her composure cracked, her jaw twitching. Callista's hand tightened around her pen until it snapped. Their lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Let the record reflect that this testimony, though posthumous, directly corroborates the plaintiff's claim. The video ended with Dad's quiet stare into the camera, a look I'd known all my life, the one that said, stand up straight, don't look away. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, out of nowhere, Mrs. Perry, the same neighbor who'd stopped waving at me, stood up from the back row. Her voice shook, but it carried. I remember Desmond telling me once, Mika was his heart. And that's who should be in that house. A murmur ran through the room. Another neighbor spoke. Then another. Words of support, small but steady, building like rain before a storm. Callista turned red, her lawyer whispering urgently, but she couldn't meet my eyes. Monique stepped forward, her voice calm but cutting. Your Honor, this is not about greed or vengeance. It's about honoring a man's final wishes and protecting the one person he trusted most. The judge looked down at his notes, then at me. His tone softened. We'll issue our decision next week. Until then, all assets remain frozen. The gavel hit once, echoing through the chamber. As people began to stand, a single clap broke the silence. I turned to see Garrett in the back row, his weathered hands coming together once, twice. Others followed until the sound filled the room, a quiet applause, respectful but resolute. Callista stood abruptly and stormed out, heels clicking against the tile. Vera followed, eyes glassy but unrepentant. I stayed seated for a moment, hands folded in my lap, letting the weight of it all sink in. When I finally stepped outside, the Arizona sun hit my face like a baptism. The air smelled of dust and pine and something else, freedom, maybe. Monique walked beside me down the courthouse steps. "You did good in there," she said. I smiled faintly. "Dad did good. I just pressed play." She chuckled. "Sometimes, that's all courage is." We parted ways in the parking lot. I stood beside my car for a long moment, watching people leave in twos and threes, their conversations hushed but not cruel anymore. It was strange how quickly the tide could turn once truth had a voice. I looked up at the wide blue sky, whispered into the light, "It's almost over." The sky over the courthouse was the same pale blue it had been when this all began. Still and indifferent. I sat on the bench just outside the courtroom doors, knees pressed together, hands clasped in my lap like I was back in church, waiting for the sermon to start. The verdict was minutes away, but I wasn't pacing. I wasn't wringing my hands. I was still. Monique sat beside me, calm as ever, tapping her pen against her knee. "You've done everything right, Mika," she said quietly. "No matter how this shakes out, you stood up for yourself. That matters." I nodded once. Inside, the courtroom was silent as the judge took his seat. The bailiff called order. Everyone rose, then sat again in waves. I could feel the weight of eyes behind me, neighbors, local reporters, maybe a few people who had silently watched my family unravel and now came to see how it would end. The judge's voice was even, rehearsed, but his words landed with the force of something much bigger. "This court recognizes the original last will and testament of Desmond Krell as valid and binding. All claims to the contrary have been dismissed." My heart didn't leap. It didn't even flutter. It just steadied. The judge continued, "Further, this court finds sufficient evidence of attempted fraud and estate manipulation by Vera Linnell and Callista Marie Krell. Restitution is to be paid, and the estate, including all property and assets, is awarded to Mika Krell in full." He paused. Looked at me. "Ms. Krell, the court commends your courage and diligence in preserving your father's wishes. This ruling stands." He hit the gavel. The sound echoed like a crack in the air. I stood slowly. I didn't look at Callista or my mother. I didn't need to. The sound of their silence was enough. By the time I stepped outside, the day had warmed. Not by much, but enough to remind me that the world didn't end inside courtrooms. The fallout came fast. Within 48 hours, Vera received an official reprimand from the court, her name publicly tied to elder manipulation and forgery. Callista, however, took the harder hit. Her PR agency dropped her within the week. Sponsors pulled their support. She tried to post a video on her usual platform, voice trembling as she declared she had been framed by a jealous sibling. But the comments section wasn't kind. "She forged a will. That's not jealousy. That's fraud. Y'all believe this woman. She let her sister take all the blame. Actions speak louder than captions." Her followers began to vanish. Her image, perfectly crafted for years, shattered in hours. Meanwhile, back home, the neighborhood shifted. Mrs. Perry brought over banana bread. Mr. Lin offered to mow my lawn. The barista at the corner coffee shop gave me a free drink and said, "I always knew you were the real one." Vera stopped speaking to me. She packed her things 2 days after the ruling. I came home to find her bedroom empty, the bed stripped, her favorite teacups gone. She didn't leave a note. But I wasn't angry. Not anymore. I stood in the middle of that house, our house, and looked around. The walls still carried the echoes of arguments and unspoken words, but also my father's laughter, his footsteps, the sound of his chair creaking in the evening as he read. And that made it harder. Because this place was never just brick and wood. It was history. It was memory. But it was also scarred. So I made my choice. That night, I pulled out a piece of stationery from Dad's old desk, sat at the dining room table, and wrote my last words to this house. This home was once full of love. I hope someday, what's left of it can be again. But not with me. I folded the note, placed it on the mantel, and walked through each room one final time. I didn't pack boxes. I took only a small suitcase, the medal, and the letter he left me. The next morning, I signed the deed transfer. The house was put up for sale. Monique handled everything. I didn't even need to step foot inside the courthouse again. By sunset, I was unlocking the door to a second-floor apartment by the lake. Quiet, modest, with wide windows and a view of the water that shimmered in the dying light. It didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be mine. I mounted the medal inside a small glass frame, centered it on the wall above my writing desk. Next to it, I pinned the note Dad wrote. "What they want is the house. What you deserve is the truth." That night, I sat on the small balcony, legs curled under me, a mug of tea warming my hands. The world felt smaller but somehow safer. Garrett called. We didn't talk long. He just said, he'd be proud, and I said, I hope so. We didn't need to say more. The water reflected the moonlight in broken pieces, soft and shifting. I listened to the wind move through the trees, the gentle hum of a boat engine somewhere in the distance. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for the next blow. I wasn't waiting to be questioned, doubted, diminished. I had nothing left to prove. I didn't win. I healed. Some battles aren't fought with fists, but with truth, persistence, and the courage to speak up when silence has been the norm for too long. This story wasn't just about inheritance. It was about reclaiming dignity, drawing a line against manipulation, and refusing to be erased by the people who should have protected you most. Have you ever been the one who chose peace over power until it cost you everything? If this story moved you, leave a comment below and share your experience. Don't forget to subscribe, there's more where this came from. Real stories. Real people. Real strength.